I'm Eric Barden.
I'm Amy Barden.
Welcome to a second part of a Bombardment episode where we're having a really, really good time with Eci Ameh. And this podcast is precisely down the lane that we're trying to go, which is what, babe?
Different perspectives.
Yes, I would say different
I think
perspectives.
so far she's winning.
Oh my goodness gracious. Come on, wife.
The over-under.
Come on, wife.
This one. Yeah. I knew you would like her. Yeah.
She's really fun. She's really smart. We have different perspectives and we're able to talk about them and, respect each other's perspective, but then be pretty adamant about our own. And that's what we think America needs a little bit more of.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to dive more into police-community relationships because at the end of the day, Eric, you cannot possibly know what it is to be her, what it feels like to be her, and she cannot possibly know what it feels like to be a sworn officer, especially after decades, and what that exposure is like. And so I think, that, again, that's why I value her professional lane so much, is that there has got to be a space to convene those different perspectives where there's greater empathy and understanding. She's going to win, but...
Well, how about some empathy and understanding for me?
You're fine.
I'm fine? I'm okay? All right. Well, prepare to be bombarded.
But let me ask you a question. Let me bombarding you with a question.
Oh, let's go. I've never been bombarded back.
Yeah, well,
this is new.
This is an Uno reverse card being played right now.
I like it.
Well, how do you feel like that would affect what community experiences? I mean,
I think it would be a net benefit. I really, really do. I mean,
why?
I would say that. What's that?
Nothing.
Oh, you guys are having a side convo. Okay, a little sidebar.
Well, can I just say real quick before you finish answering that? So I was listening to your Deontay Damper episode because I just love Deontay.
He is the best.
And in the intro, Amy, you said that you were going to side with Deontay in any argument that came up. And I don't know if that's what you said before this, because I just want to make sure.
Are you feeling it? You're feeling the love over there? Yeah.
I didn't formally declare it. I
wanted a full commitment of support throughout
like
this entire.
Contract, right?
Yeah.
There's very few people I would predict that. Usually I don't categorically align with 81, which I think is some of the fun of being me. Yes, I am very predisposed
side
to
note,
it.
Amy's got a wee touch of a bug, so she's not feeling 100%. So she probably
it's watering down.
Well, no. What I'm suggesting is I'm getting to talk a little more than normal just because your throat hurts.
That's about to change. But we're bombarding you right now, so you're not off the hot seat. Let's get back to me pressing you on the hard questions.
This is a good question, though.
So what I believe, look, you can talk about being understanding with community, but the proof's in the pudding, right? The proof is in how do officers engage with community and because every one of those contacts, officers are engaging with community tens of thousands of times a day in Seattle, across a variety of formal contacts and just walking by folks on the street or driving by them or whatever the case may be. But every time that we police officers talk to community, that's an opportunity to gain trust or lose trust or hold serve or whatever the case might be. And so what I strongly believe that supervisors being empowered to be responsible for the officers that work for them more than abrogating that to a third party to hear back 6 months later dramatically improves the level of influence that those sergeants have on officers and would have a net improvement in the performance of our police officers on the street every day. So I understand the perspective that, well, the cops can't be trusted, so OPA's got to do the investigation. Okay. That is a view it is operationally dysfunctional to obtain the desired improved outcomes. I acquiesce to that from a moderate to serious level violation. Yeah, take it to OPA, have OPA do the independent investigation. The de minimis stuff, the sergeants ought to handle on scene, document it, run that up the chain of command. They can file it with OPA for review if necessary. But and there have been attempts at this. I don't know how much history you have on this topic, but there have been attempts at this, and what they did was they essentially told sergeants, okay, if you think you can handle these de minimis things, rudeness, handle it, and then tell us exactly what happened and what your conclusion was, and send it to OPA. Well, then OPA was finding that they thought the sergeant should have said this or should have said that, and so now the sergeant is being investigated by OPA. So the sergeant was like, hey, I know how to solve this problem. Just all issues go to OPA, and it's just completely undermined the roles of sergeants in the police department, and it has hurt our overall performance because that sergeant should be the guiding force for our younger, newer officers as they come up.
I think one of the structural issues, like in my department, you've got the equivalent as a supervisor, right? And then dispatcher is the equivalent of an officer. They're part of the same union, right? And so it's really interesting realizing they're always trying to drive toward consensus. And so you don't have the same, like when you jump up to the lieutenants who are part of SPMA, that's where I see the better oversight generally, because there's this greater autonomy and leadership. I would say at the end of the day, no matter what kind of business you're trying to run, it depends on the character and the ethics and the skill set of that manager to provide correction that is productive, that is fair, to know how to coach up. And so I do think this whole world of like civil service and public service is odd to me because it's not really necessarily, it's not designed the way I normally design, which is who has the temperament, the capacity, the skill set, has demonstrated the leadership, you get promoted. Totally different process in these worlds.
Yeah.
And I don't actually know how to solve
the
for
only
that.
thing that you cannot consider for promotions in the Seattle Police Department is work performance.
Pause. This is where we do the office. Look at the camera.
This is where I just grab my purse and get up and leave.
But it is designed that way.
And it's because, again, that we have these aspirational philosophies and desires, and then we implement a program to try to solve for it. And in some instances, we actually make the problem worse. So the reason that there is civil service is because, old boy network, cronyism, managers and executives in law enforcement used to promote the people that they liked and didn't promote the people that they didn't like. Or if you had a family member, you'd promote your family member who maybe wasn't as qualified or shouldn't. So what they did is
that doesn't happen anymore.
Oh,
Well,
thank God.
That was the old system.
Yeah.
Well, it actually doesn't happen at all.
Favoritism?
Okay,
Promoting
let
people that
me
you
finish a sentence. Let me finish a sentence. So transfers and assignments can be based on favoritism, but promotions are heavily regulated by civil service, and civil service is run by another independent organization that administers a test, which is rote memorization. Can you pick the right answer, multiple choice, et cetera. And then it's become so dehumanized that now most of the promotional exams are done, the oral part is done on a video where you sit in front of a camera and you answer certain questions staring at a camera lens, which is fine if you were interviewing to become a news anchor, but is not helpful if you're interviewing to become a supervisor or advance your level of leadership as a supervisor. And so and then a list comes out. Then you're scored. You're scored on how many right answers you got on your memory test, which, by the way, almost all of the answers in the real world, you look up. If you need a manual reference, you don't have the manual memorized in your brain. That doesn't make you a great supervisor. You know where to find it, and you get the right answer to your people. But the interpersonal skills that are necessary to be an effective leader aren't necessarily identified by giving news anchor responses to a camera.
So it's not true that the test tests things like the officer's capacity to abuse a position of power?
Tests the officer's ability to abuse a
Their
position.
Capacity to,
Yeah.
If there's
you mean,
not,
is it a
you're saying,
psychological test?
well, I'm asking about,
It's
like,
not
I'm
a
giving an
psych test.
example of, is that
No.
one of the things that it tests for?
No.
Because you described it as just memorization and then talking into a camera for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But I've talked to the head of the Civil Service Commission, and this was a specific thing that we talked about. Now, I haven't taken this test
Right.
because working for SPD actually would bar me from having the job that I have right now. Can you believe that? It's written in the ordinance that if I
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I've ever worked for SPD, I cannot hold the position that I have, so I cannot take the test because who knows? I'd qualify,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then I'd be. But this is one of the things that was
we're
discussed. And so
hiring.
I hear you're always hiring. But
Well, listen, this is what I would say. Like, that's my actual academic discipline, is education, cognition, stuff like that. And it's like, there is no exam, actually, that could accurately represent that true cultural competency and emotional intelligence and improvisational skill. And so, like in the 911 world, it is the most fascinating part of the work to figure out, how do you even screen out, the applicants? Everybody thinks they're going to be, this is what I would do in that moment of crisis or trauma. Learning this year one, I thought, okay, well, this is a significant structural issue that generally, again, me as a manager, I would be looking at 10 years of performance, especially those tricky moments, right? Complexity, ambiguity, which this is the world, right? I don't know of a more ambiguous space than the spaces we're talking about. And there is no exam on paper. This is the debate about the SATs, right? And so I don't know how to solve for that, but I do think it's important for the public to understand that the way promotionals are happening in law enforcement around this country, it's not the way that we would do it in the private sector, the nonprofit sector. And that is one of the issues.
Well, I mean, you could have somebody.
well, that's scary.
Yeah, you can have somebody, and this is not widely known. You could have somebody that's a chronic underperformer, right? They're on that cusp of like kind of, they might annoy, their behavior might annoy their workmates, but not rise to the level of being, a hostile work environment or OPA worthy, but they're just kind of annoying, and they kind of do the least amount possible. And they might be, there's those people who, when something comes up, I got it, I'm going to do it. And then there's always those people that are like hiding out and trying to avoid having to do anything, right? You have that person, but they study really hard for the test. They score highly on the test. If they're number one on the list, and you got somebody who's a high performer, and maybe they work so hard that they didn't get as much study time as the other guy, but they come in 4th, 5th, 6th, you got to promote one. So work performance has nothing at all to do with, unless there's some egregious sort of violation. Anyway, enough about that. So, because we're not going to solve that.
Well,
here.
no, because I want to go back to bombarding you.
Okay,
because I feel
I'm
like
ready.
we
I'm
stepped
ready.
to the side of this whole issue about like what our community is going to experience differently if supervisors have the discretion to investigate or just impart discipline for minor misconduct. And I'm still not clear on like what are the communities meant to experience better. I understand that as supervisors take it into their own hands, presumably it's going to get addressed quicker and more efficiently. But it sounds like that's not actually the case. Like when it was tried out in the past, OPA was looking at it at least and saying like supervisors are not effectively. And I think that for the concern that I've had, I see you're shaking your head. The concern that I've had, because it's the concern that's brought from communities, are that the minor misconduct is actually the least likely for supervisors. to act on.
The
And
least
the- and
likely
the-
what?
They're
At
not
least-
taking action.
Yeah,
The
like if
supervisors
somebody's
aren't
late to
addressing it.
work or something like that, that's actually less likely for a supervisor to impart discipline. And it's also not what the community cares the most about. I mean,
Yeah.
they don't care what cops are showing up late for their shifts. They are caring about the more serious forms of misconduct, and those are always going to be in the purview
Do you,
of OPA
do you
anyway.
believe that that there are environments of high expectation and environments of lower expectations? I mean, I'm asking a rhetorical question. Of course, we all have worked different places and been different, had different supervisors, had different environments that we've worked in, and some of them have had very high expectations, and people tend to rise to the level of expectation. And so what I would say to that is that when an officer is arriving late or unprepared or disheveled or not meeting minimum expectations, often that person is not the one who then goes out and slays during their shift. That person
When you say slays, I need you to be more clear in this context. Like, I just...
All right, you know what
I would argue that yes,
you're
they
saying.
are exactly who goes out and slays.
Now we're getting the calm down. All right,
Oh my God.
no. So goes out and does really well during their shift.
Okay, thank you.
And so what I would suggest is that holding folks to look, this is the expectation here. I think that translates to the bigger things, and I think that adding additional scrutiny to the sergeants for doing the very thing that we want the sergeants to do is dysfunctional to obtain the desired outcomes that we're looking for. And so I know it used to work because before there was a consent decree and before there was an OPA, sergeants were major players in the performance of their officers. They are less so now under the current system. And so I'd like to see a blend where we get the benefits sort of both.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think it comes back to ethical leadership. I mean, I know sergeants where I'm like, if you could run everything, that would be fantastic. Because I have that much confidence in their integrity and their character, their work ethic, and the way that they're thinking about community and their role in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I know people all around the country where I think you were, I wish you were not in public service.
Yeah.
And so
Every
I think it
industry,
always
yep.
comes back. It always comes back to the character of leadership. It is really hard to maintain a positive culture no matter what your business. But I do think this is an interesting, we haven't talked about this yet, that again, the construction of the space, there are some fundamental flaws in it. And so if you could fix that.
Yeah.
That'd be really great.
Nobody.
Yeah. Nobody?
Yeah.
Hello?
I do think, Eci, sincerely, when I met you for the first time, it was thank God. Danny, other people had described you because I know there's this is just an essential role that has to work. And I never knew what anything was and all the acronyms and all the different bodies, but I knew that people had lost faith in the CPC. I didn't know exactly why, but I heard that all the time. Like, whatever. I don't know what the point is. I just had sort of heard that. And it made sense to me logically. You've got to have that connective tissue. And again, what I said about community, of course, is not going to feel empowered. I know if I'm in a meeting and I'm, the person with the title or the highest paid, naturally there's going to be this inclination to agree with me and to tell me I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to be very thoughtful about how to flip that upside down. And I think the same thing's true for the uniform. I think that you are brilliant. Just as a person, but I'm so glad you're in this space.
Thank you.
And so, I wish there were many more ECs.
Thank you.
And
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I don't think the
Yeah.
world can handle more, but it's a really nice
I really
sentiment.
want to know your parents now.
Yeah.
I feel like your mom and I are going to be really good friends.
I feel like
Eci,
that
is
could be
there
the case.
is there anything that you really want folks to understand about CPC or about community police relations or anything that you want to make sure you touch on before we?
I don't even know that we have time on this podcast
Round two.
for
You
me
got a lot?
for me to bombard you with the
Yeah.
things that I want people to know about the
top pick.
I would say that what I want people to know is I think that we need to not be afraid to have the conversation about race
Yeah.
when it comes to policing and public safety. I think that we need to not be afraid to talk about government's role and its obligation to be anti-racist in everything that it does. And I think that we need to think about the fact that the way that we have been approaching things as a system for a very, very long time has been producing inequitable outcomes. And it's not because anybody is walking around saying I'm racist or wearing a white hood. It's because our systems are designed to produce a particular outcome and it's happening. And I think that when we don't address that, we lose credibility with communities that understand that that is the case and is what happened. You know, you talked about 2020 in Seattle. I was with the city of Seattle in 2020. It was my first time with the city. And I really thought it was going to be my last because I was like, I'm not about to do this at all. I was with the Office of Civil Rights. I was the deputy director. And I was hired in March. At that time, I came on board and we were like, man.
Good timing.
I had worked in Olympia with the state for 8.5 years. And I lived on Beacon Hill in Seattle the whole time. So I was doing like a 3-hour commute back and forth. Get this job with the city of Seattle. And I'm like, wow, great. I'm about to live my, Sex in the City fantasy.
yeah.
I'm going to be taking public transportation to work and it's going to be all cool. And, I started within the first couple of weeks, we'd get on these calls every single day with the mayor's office and the heads of all the city departments. And it was about something called coronavirus. Every single day we had to get on these calls. We're like, what is this? And whatever, it's probably something that somebody made up. And then the calls started turning into every day they would start with like the body count from the night before. And we were like rapidly sending everybody home to work from home. And we're a civil rights office, right? So this caused chaos because everybody was worried about their health and their safety. And we were realizing that all of the systemic issues that we have not addressed in public health were now they're coming out when we need those systems to succeed the most. And then a couple months later, George Floyd is murdered in Minneapolis, and we're in the civil rights office, and communities just erupted.
Ground zero, yeah.
It was, I mean, the chop, the Chaz, the headbutting between the mayor at that time, Jenny Durkin, and Chief Carmen Best of SPD. And we were, as an office of Black and Brown people doing civil rights work, torn between what was happening, for us personally, processing this moment, and then what was happening professionally, which was, arming people much less informed than us about what they need to go say to crowds of people, right? So providing talking points to the mayor about like, what do I say? We use tear gas on all these people and now what? They want answers. And this was what we were going through. And I think that one thing that stood out to me during that time is, it felt like that was, to a lot of people, the moment that everybody understood how racism was playing out, right? In terms of how police interact with communities. And it wasn't. That's why they call it like the racial reckoning, the summer of the race. And it's like, it wasn't actually that at all. I mean, it was this had been a conversation for a very, very long time before that. I mean, I think it just reached a fever pitch. Cops weren't hated by communities because of 2020. It was because 2020 just like ripped open a festering wound that had already been there for a very long time. And so, long way of saying that there are times, there are moments in history that I think that we have addressed that part of the issue head on and had a conversation about it.
Yeah.
But then we go on back to our day-to-day lives and we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about that.
Yeah.
And back to that conversation that we were having earlier about, going and sitting and listening. There is so much to be said about the act of humility that communities need to see from SPD. That is why I said that, listening is appropriate when you've held the mic for a very long time. And I think that is just an example of what communities are experiencing, is that they have felt disenfranchised for a very, very long time. They have lived in fear for a very, very long time. And so the respect and humility that comes with going and listening to that. And if it's an ass whooping, it's an ass whooping, right? But it might be just, I mean, I don't.
Okay, but here's from 38 years at CLPD, and I spent 38 years, and Seattle PD has gone and reached out and done community meetings for 38 years. I think the way that you're presenting this is that, if SPD only would go out and listen for a while, then things might change. And I will tell you, nearly 4 decades, maybe we haven't done it right. Maybe we haven't done it enough. Maybe, haven't done it as well as we should. But framing or letting sit this idea that if only SPD would begin to listen, then things might be better. That's just a false narrative. SPD has been we had an entire bureau of community engagement in the police department, whose entire goal and purpose was to engage community, listen to community, and the people that we put there were the folks with the closest. We didn't have Amy, but we have folks that are really good at that, at listening and taking the criticism and not personalizing it. We have done that, and so I just think it's important to do that. I don't think it's not valuable. I just think that we've been doing that, and part of what also needs to happen is that the police department also needs to provide perspective and context for what, because I think you said earlier that folks do understand that there are complexities to law enforcement, and it's not beyond the average person's ability to contemplate the factors that are involved. And so this idea that the police, if we would only start listening, things would be different. If that were true, if the police hadn't been doing that, then maybe that would be true. But the police have.
But maybe you haven't.
Yeah,
I mean, even
and again, it's not, Eric, you, as someone outside of this, you are a specific type of person and leader. I got to be your professional colleague. So you're bringing the way that you went about it, the way that you thought about it. You are one of the most sincere, forthright, candid people I know. And you were as a leader as well. I saw you in roll calls. I saw you in community meetings, and you were not on the defensive. I have a totally different perspective. I think the failure is the executive everywhere. That the way that money moves in a budget, why didn't we set up anything else to go to these calls? We scrutinize police, drive for reforms, but unless and until you have something else, unless and until you actually invest in early intervention and prevention and CVI work, it doesn't get better. And so that's where I actually assign, if there is responsibility, that's where I assign it. In Albuquerque, the police chief supported alternative response, so that was cool. But regardless of that, that was the council and the executive saying, no, we're going to invest deeply in something else. And the third thing, they have as many ACS responders out there now intervening, unarmed responders intervening, as police, fire, and EMS. And that is moving money and being sincere rather than pretending we care, right? Here's 6 care responders. Mm-hmm. I got 900,000 calls. And then again, I'm diverting everything to SPD and vilifying them for over-policing. Mm-hmm. So
Yeah, I mean,
Can two things both be true
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
same time?
totally,
You know?
totally,
100%.
yeah.
And I don't know how effective SPD has been listening over the last
Well,
38 years. I question it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know anything about that. I mean, 38 years is it's a very long time when you think about my lifespan.
Right.
But you know,
Right,
I mean,
right.
like you're so at listening
I'm
personally.
okay, I'm
But
working
you know,
on
when
it. I'm
I
a
think
work in
about the
progress.
entire department,
Yeah.
you know, I've seen some really ineffective efforts at community engagement and then a checking of the box.
Yeah.
I think of that recently with surveillance, the surveillance pilot, and then the subsequent expansion of the surveillance pilot. You had an overabundance of community members raising a variety of different concerns. And this is also at a time where we're seeing a unilateral deployment of the National Guard in other cities and places where it seems like maybe this is not the time that we want to be generating the type of data that could, you know, put certain of our neighbors at risk. And the community engagement was weak, non-existent at best. Sometimes inviting people that already were supportive of the pilot and not sharing the information about the fact there was even an opportunity to speak with anybody who would have concerns about it. I think that the pilot was driven forward mostly by business owners and concerns that came up from them. But, you know, record-breaking number of people that showed up in council. You have a letter of concern written by Community Police Commission and the Office of Civil Rights, city departments, one of which reports directly to the mayor. And you have all of this concern, and then still not only the pilot initially, but then the expansion of that pilot with no data to support it. When I think pilot, I'm thinking scientific. I'm thinking that we are going to try this thing on, see how it works, see how effective it is, and then if we have a basis for it, then we're going to invest more into it, especially in a time that the city's facing a deficit scenario, right? That we have money for cameras, but we don't have money for a lot of the other things that we need to run as a city. And so when I hear we listened to people and the outcome of it is that we did this thing, I don't necessarily trust that that's the case. I don't think that listening is such an idealist thing. I know you are framing it that way. In fact, I love the way that you keep going. If they would only listen, I'm sitting here like, what about the children? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm talking about government having a conversation with the people that they are responsible for serving. It's no different than what my organization does, what yours does. It's something that we expect from
you, and I agree 100%.
From everybody.
Having a conversation is having a conversation.
And I am not saying that it's going to solve the whole problem. I am not saying if only they would listen, we would solve racism.
But having a conversation is not sitting and listening. Having a conversation is a two-way. It's like what we're doing here. We're having a back and forth. So you're better understanding my perspective. Hopefully, I'm better understanding your perspective. That's where common ground is found.
But if I lectured you for 38 years and then said I want to sit down and have a conversation with you, would you want to have a conversation, or would you want to have a turn to speak?
Or vice versa, if you had been vilified for 38 years and you had tried to listen, you might say, I want to listen, but I also want to respond. I want to have a conversation. And of course, that's a perspective thing. I mean, you're saying we've had the mic and we haven't listened, and maybe it's time to listen. And I'm saying, having been there, we've engaged in a lot of community dialogue, and I think it's helpful. I think it 100% informs the police about perspectives that we wouldn't necessarily have. But I also think there's huge value in the officers being able to engage with community and provide a perspective to community so that they understand why certain decisions were made. That doesn't mean they're going to agree, but I think the conversation is what matters, not just. And humility is a big part of the conversation. But again, it's a conversation. It's not just the ass whooping part.
I just think there's so often a lack of sincerity on both sides, right? I mean, it's pretty rare where you see people show up both expressly with the intent to understand. And what you're talking about can confirm. I have seen more like, no. You know, we did a community listening tour. We got feedback. I see this at the county level all the time. And so often it is complicated. It was interesting, like license plate readers, all of that. There are a number of issues where I definitely could debate both sides. I really could. I could see. And that's the point. The point is that we should have the debate and then be able to say, like Joy Hollingsworth and I have talked about this, to say, yeah, we see the array of concerns. We're going to err on the side of this concern. And here's how we're thinking about it and why. And that's just not happening. It's generally there's on one side or the other a foregone conclusion, and we're going to advance it. The decision's been made. And I think that's where we're losing community. I think people know that.
Disingenuous.
It's disingenuous. It's like, yeah, here's public comment.
Yeah. Oh,
You know,
yeah.
and then everybody does exactly what they were going to do before that public comment.
That's true. That's true. I mean, how often are we willing to take something that's at the ground level and co-create the ideas versus come with a fully fledged plan and then check the box of listening? And it's true. I think that, you know, this almost feels like a throwback to the way we started this conversation, thinking about like these international perspectives or how different people can come together. And sometimes it does feel like both sides are painting with broad strokes.
Yeah.
You know, that there's a perception of police officers. I don't know if I'm going to go as far as like villainized for 38 years. I mean, but because, you know, it's not like you just like got struck by lightning.
I was celebrated.
You know? Cops
often.
were, you personally, I'm sure were. But cops were just like walking down the street, minding their own business, and everybody decided to hate them all of a sudden for 38 years.
People don't like folks imposing on them. People like to be autonomous. And when I'm driving down the road and a police car gets behind me, I don't like it. That doesn't mean I hate the police.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that police officer did something wrong to me or that I've been victimized by the police. It means that I don't like being under scrutiny. No human likes being under scrutiny. So the position that law enforcement is in, they're the enforcement part of community. It's hard to be loved in that environment. So I don't want it to be perceived that what you're suggesting is that the reason that police have been hated is because they're horrible people or they've acted, you know, uniformly horrible. We have like every other industry in the world, we have folks that conduct themselves very well, and we have folks that conduct themselves and in a manner that's outside of what's acceptable, particularly in Seattle PD. And I know that I absolutely acquiesce and agree that there are, you know, podunk this and that are sort of unregulated, you know, probably untrained, probably less educated or you know, lower on the food chain in terms of level of employment, you know, officers working in some small little podunk department somewhere that don't have any scrutiny and do whatever it is they want to do personally. That is not the Seattle Police Department, and it hasn't been the Seattle Police Department for a very long time. And the Seattle Police Department holds folks accountable. And so I think that one of the things that the police department has to do is acknowledge when we make mistakes, and that's, I think, to Amy's
You keep
point.
saying we. You need to say they.
They. I'm not there anymore.
I know. I wasn't calling them on it because I was actually appreciating it.
Those SPD people. I did it for a while, so it's hard to say. Yeah, it's not me. I don't work there. But you know, we need to. They need to hold.
That's why it's so personal
they
to
need
you.
they need to hold folks accountable, but at the same time, they need to explain why they're doing the things that they're doing, so that folks can, those that are willing to explore a different perspective, have an opportunity to learn a different view.
Yeah, but their role is not just enforcement, though. I mean, the idea that people don't like to be under scrutiny and that's, one of their just like there's this natural kind of rebelliousness that people have against being under scrutiny. But the big party role is protecting and keeping people safe. And if you are seeing somebody in that way, then you don't feel that sense of like, I hate you because I see you in a positive light. And I think there's many people that have that exact perception of the police is like they see them and they are like, great, I feel safe. And that's a great thing, but I think that we need to address the fact that that's not the case for many people too. And it is not because there is just this like sense of I don't want to be scrutinized, I don't want to be enforced. I think it is about the how. We all report to somebody in our work.
Let me add.
We all have to be accountable.
Let me add this to the conversation. 35 years ago, 34 years ago, I was a sergeant in the Central District, overwhelmingly African-American community at the time.
At the time is
at the time, yeah. I know things have changed. I know things have changed.
And I to displacement.
And I can tell you that 34 years ago, again, far longer ago than either of you can, remember.
True.
Clearly. But there were, folks marching against police this and, police that. And I would go to community meetings and you would drive down, 23rd and Cherry, 23rd and Union, or 20th, or one of the residential streets, and most of the homes there had their curtains drawn, and during the middle of the day, and the metal door on the front of their house. And you'd never hear from those folks. And those folks were not the folks out marching against the police. I would go to community meetings. I would go to Crime Watch meetings. I was the sergeant of the community police team in the East Precinct for several years. I would go to a variety of community meetings. And overwhelmingly, African-American folks would come up to me and say, we want you in our neighborhood. We want the police to patrol our streets. And I would go back to my officers in roll call and I would say, because if the only thing you're seeing is people complaining about the work that you're doing, and we think of the police as this enigma, right? Like it's just they're people, just like the CPC is people, and just like the Office of Civil Rights is just a group of people. That's what the police are. And so you don't want to believe that, only hear the loudest voices. I would go back and tell my officers in roll call, hey, don't forget, there's a whole bunch of the silent majority out there that really appreciate the work that you do, because I wanted my officers to have purpose and feel like they were valued by community, because they genuinely were. So I do it, and I want to make sure that we don't do that. And the podcast is to speak for every part of community. There are different perspectives within community, and I felt like we got a lot of support in the African-American community, because I think those communities often feel like there are some that are probably talking to you, telling you, we don't want the police here. I don't feel comfortable with the police being here. They don't make me feel safe. But I think there's a lot of folks that having that police car drive by their house makes them feel better.
Well, that's the point that I just made. I mean, I just said there's a lot of people that see the police as their protectors. And I didn't say it's not the Black people.
No.
Because
no,
we're not a monolith.
Yeah, right.
And people do feel differently. And I can bet that the folks that were saying we want to see more cops, they weren't talking about the ones that are giving your former department a bad name.
Yeah, that's right.
They were talking, they were telling you that because they were talking about the cops that are like you. And so there's, like we've been saying, multiple things can be true at the same time. And while there are, while we don't want to paint with broad strokes and say this is true for all of SPD, or this is true for all of the communities, or even this particular community, right? The Black community, the capital of the Black community is not the Central District. Never was. Yeah. Okay, so like that's not representative either, and that's okay. But none of that means that we shouldn't still address where there are issues, because that's just a responsibility of government that we're all accountable for. When you think about the things that we need to be doing better, or what community want to see more of, we catch a lot of flack. I mean, it's not like, we're beloved by communities because we have the mission that we do. We've been yelled at alongside SPD. Yeah. And that was really infuriating because we really didn't do anything. You know what I mean? Talk about getting yelled at. So we're like literally, we got kicked out of White Center Pride. There was an event last year, and we got kicked out of it because police is in our name. Yeah. And we could not convince them, because this is like after the May 24th incident. Yeah. We could not convince people. We're like, but we're not them. And they're like, but it says police right there. And we're like, but we're not though. We're an independent city department. We don't report to the mayor. We don't report and they didn't care about any of that. Yeah. It's like, well, you're next door to them. So still it's a problem. And so
you felt a little of the love that police feel.
We feel it all the time.
Yeah.
We feel. I mean, after May 24th, I went to SPD's own advisory council, LGBTQ plus advisory council. We got yelled at by Deontay Damper. He turned around and said, "The whole city, all of y'all," and we were like, "All of us?" Like, not all of us, really, all of us, because we literally had no control over that situation.
Deontay is very expressive.
Yeah. He is, but and should be. I think that we are serving communities. We are serving the same communities. Yeah. We often have the exact same goal. In fact, I think we always have the exact same goal.
Yeah, I think so too.
But
I wish I'd have said
when
that.
there's a failure, it is still a failure, right? And it's not helpful for people to be like, well, it was this part or it was that part, or we're not them. I know it says police, but we're really not. It's not helpful for people to that. It's what they want to see is us working together to fix it. Yeah. And so, this is where it started. We're not anti-police. We are pro-accountability. And I think sometimes people talk about the accountability system in Seattle as like a triangle, CPC, OIG, which is, Inspector General, the auditor part of it, and then OPA. We've been talking about OPA as the part that investigates officer misconduct. And I always call it a square, because how can you have an accountability system that doesn't have SPD as one of the partners in, this is how it was always contemplated to be, was that SPD was partners in achieving what we have envisioned for police accountability in Seattle. Yeah. So we are partners, and while we have different roles, we're not enemies. Yeah. Genuinely, CPC, we want SPD to succeed. It'd be great if you put us out of business. Yeah. It'd be great if there wasn't a part of the police accountability that had to lift up community voices to SPD, where they don't normally have access, or where the barriers are not broken down for them to have that access, and for change to be made. It would be great if that didn't need to happen, because it didn't need to happen, but we're not there.
Nope.
So we're still working together.
But I will say this, that is about the best conclusion to an episode. Summary.
You see how she brought it full circle?
She brought it full circle. She did.
And now you've been bombarded.
Thank you. I was going to say, typically I end, because you've seen it, and said, now you've been bombarded. But I feel like we've been bombarded.
Got bombarded.
We've been Eci.
Yeah. It was all a trap.
The Bombardin Podcast is a Barden Squared production. Executive producers are Eric Barden and Amy Barden, and video and audio production of the Bombardin Podcast is by Thread Theory Creative.